Hey guys, welcome to our first video of our book series for the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by John Gottman, Dr. Gottman. We're going to be going through chapters 1 through 3 today, so we're not actually getting to any of the principles. We're going to do a lot of the lead up, which is interesting because it's actually a lot more information than when we do each principle later on.
Right.
But anyhow, or if you have the old version, it's actually going to be chapters 1 and 2, but chapters 1 through 3 for the new version of the book, which was published a couple of years ago.
Right, so this will be our longest video. It's our biggest chunk during a week. In retrospect, we may have separated it, but to do a principle a week, I mean, that's a 7-week book club, so yeah, we decided to just cram all 3 of these in. So we have some big ideas that we're going to go through and just talk about. So in the thread below, you can add to what we're saying because, you know, this is just our perspective and our take on it. And, you know, some of your ahas or the things that you experienced going through these lessons, and feel free to share and add to what we're...
Yeah, we couldn't have possibly extracted everything. So hopefully if you
Right,
gained
it's 3
something
full
else,
chapters, yeah.
hey, help us all learn and then post what you got out of these 3 chapters below.
Right. So we're going to start with the Love Lab and what that was.
Yeah, the Love Lab. So what I love about Dr. Gottman's work is that he really credits his work to research and data.
There's
Like, I
science.
didn't come up with this stuff. It's
Nope.
what I learned from watching other couples converse. So the Love Lab, where he conducted like years and years of research, I think he's done 40 years of research on couples, he would bring them in to the Love Lab in Seattle, and they would spend an entire weekend of just being themselves, except for the fact that there were cameras in the room. And through his observations of these individuals, he was able to come up with what he called Divorce Predictors, as well as the 7 principles for how relationships, what makes a thriving marriage. And so through that, he wrote the book, and it was great. He's able to now claim that he can predict with 91% accuracy,
It's crazy,
within 15 minutes of watching couples converse with each other, whether or not they're going to stay together.
Right, and we're going to talk about those predictors because I think it's really important. And I know that as we went through this, and just a side story, we've read this book years ago, and it was one of the foundational books for saving our marriage, but Lance and I haven't gone through this book before as a study like we are right now. So this is as much for us and the growth of our relationship and our business and serving married couples as it is for you guys. So going through this and looking at those predictors, we could see specifically things that we had done that really, when we got to that point of separation and divorce, we were there. Like we...
Oh yeah, I was reading through it going, oh, guilty of that, guilty of that, guilty of that.
We had, I think, every single predictor.
Oh yeah, for sure,
every
for
predictor.
sure.
So we're going to go into the next thing that we think is a big idea out of these 3 chapters, and that is why save your marriage. And we have some notes here, so we're gonna work off of our
Pardon
notes.
us, yeah. Well,
Yeah, don't pardon us. This is,
we
this is how you organize this much information. So one of the things that I think is really, really important to make note of and to start this section of why save your marriage is saving your marriage doesn't mean staying in an unhealthy marriage. And this was kind of a high five moment for us, right, going through it, where when we decided that we were going to separate and potentially get divorced, it was for the kids. We weren't staying married because of our children. We really understood that staying in an unhappy, unhealthy, hostile environment with each other was affecting our kids negatively.
Right, I remember somebody asking us both one time, did you guys ever consider staying in your marriage for the kids? And we chuckled and said, no, we actually considered leaving our marriage for the kids.
And I'll tell you why, and this was really just a gut thing where the way we were looking at it was, is this what we want for our kids? Is this what we want for our girls? No, we don't. Like, we weren't happy. We had all of these 6, divorce predictors going on in our lives, and we hadn't even read the book yet, but we knew that it was unhealthy. So in saving your marriage, this isn't about staying in an unhealthy, toxic marriage. This is about truly fixing your marriage and understanding these principles. So I just want to start there. So the reasons to save your marriage, number one, is health. And the studies are across the board on living longer, lower blood pressure, lower chronic disease. What else do I have here? Oh, and more health conscious. And so, again, this is being in a healthy relationship. These are the benefits of it. So I want to stress one thing. Staying in an unhappy marriage or going through a divorce is essentially the same. So for us, and part of where I had this big aha on saving our marriage was the path is essentially the same. You're either going to have to fix yourself to fix your marriage now, or fix yourself to fix the relationship you're in later on. But the bottom line is at some point you have to fix yourself, because the common denominator in a lot of the things going on in your marriage is your contribution to those 6 things that are divorce predictors. Right? The other part is your kids. And kids that are products of unhealthy relationships or divorce have more depression. They have more peer rejection, behavior problems, primarily aggression, and low achievement in school and learning. So, go ahead.
And Gottman says that I often think that if fitness buffs spent just 10% of their weekly routine workout time, say 20 minutes a week, 20 minutes a day, working on their marriage instead of their bodies, they would get 3 times the health benefits they derive from exercise class or the treadmill. Just saying that if you're working on your relationship, you're gaining more health from doing that than just going to the gym alone.
Right, and I think that this brings up one other really interesting perspective, that what, at the end of the day, fixed and helped our marriage and our relationship is that we took basic health and basic business principles and applied them to our relationship. And so often we would say, oh, you know what, our family and our relationship is our priority, but our health even got more of a priority than our relationship. Right. We went to the gym longer, or worked out, or prepped meals more than we spent time on our relationship, spent more time in our careers and planning our business than we did in our relationship, when if we were to be asked what would be our priority, our relationship.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. So the next one is a big one, and we actually have a subsequent book to add to your reading list, The Emotional Intelligence 2.0. This is foundational. Well, emotional intelligence is it's as important, if not more important, than your IQ.
Right, and he mentions, with regard to some people call EQ as being your emotional intelligence being more important than your IQ, and they've even studied children who have developed strong emotional intelligence. And he says here, emotional intelligence has become widely recognized as an important predictor of a child's success later in life. The more in touch with feelings and the better able a child is to understand and get along with others, the sunnier that child's future. Which is more important, that he says later, than their IQ, is their EQ. Right,
and we're a homeschool family for a similar reason, that we are polar opposites from an education perspective. Lance has a PhD. I have a junior year in high school education, and my ability to be financially successful was very successful. It was great for me, and what that came from was my ability to have high emotional intelligence and have people skills and have some basic street smarts that we don't teach in school. Emotional intelligence isn't something that is taught in school.
And the great thing about highly emotionally intelligent couples is they're strong, emotionally intelligent individuals. Right? And one of the places where a high EQ comes into play in your relationship especially is in times of disagreement or argument, right? And I love, there's Dan Harris, who wrote a book, 10% Happier. He talks about emotional intelligence in relation to like meditation, but just developing emotional intelligence in situations of strife or anger or triggers. he can now act wisely versus reacting blindly. And I love the way he puts that. You know, those triggers are still there, all of the feelings, but I am more aware of them now. I know I'm cognizant of them, and I can act wisely toward them versus reacting blindly.
Right, this doesn't mean that emotion doesn't come up. It means that you have the overall perspective of what the goal is of yourself and those around you in the moment to act wisely. It doesn't mean that you don't have a feeling. It means that you act, I mean, I don't want to say like a grown-up, but...
No, it is. You know, if
you act like a... Right.
You grow up, you're a grown-up. I've read this actually a lot in a lot of marriage therapy books. It's just like emotionally intelligent individuals are they're grown-ups in their relationship.
Right, which is interesting because I brought that part up about my ability naturally in business and financial success, but there were these big baggage rocks that I carried into our relationship, which was a big part of the demise of it, was that I was emotionally unintelligent with my triggers when it came to our relationship because of my family of origin and my upbringing.
Likewise here, it was just different. You know?
Yeah,
so,
right.
Do we talk a little bit about the Lasada principle?
Yeah,
which
I love that. You teach on that.
The Lasada principle is an idea derived from business, but also translates into relationships whereby, and I think the ratio in business is 6-to-1. Successful businesses have 6 positive situations versus 1 negative one. And the ratio doesn't necessarily matter, but the idea in relationships is that fights are going to happen, arguments are going to happen, you know, but the more positive scenarios you have as compared to those negative ones, you can still have a thriving, flourishing relationship in marriage.
Right, it drowns it out. And I think the percentage is important. It's kind of like Julie and I talk a lot about food, and we have a very regimented food schedule, and we are at a point where it's like 95-5. So 5% of our choices with food are not great choices, but because of the 95% of the choices, we feel good in our bodies, we feel good in our minds, and we don't feel guilty when we have a froyo.
People call it cheat day or whatever, workout.
Right, exactly.
Right. Okay, cool. Emotional intelligence. Next.
Yeah. Why most therapy fails.
Yeah, Gottman had a great section on why he claims most marital therapy fails, and he says it's, you know, he's not trying to come down on marriage therapists. They're just taught what they're taught. But he said that...
Well, just like anything, I'm sure there are... We had a positive experience a couple times in therapy, and we had not so positive experiences in therapy.
Right. And he says what typically often happens is that in marriage therapy, they tend to work on one facet, one tool, versus a holistic approach.
Right.
So they'll often, you'll come to the therapist with a problem, right? And then they'll fix it. They'll help you fix that one problem. So it's like plugging holes. Each time you're coming back,
let's plug that problem.
Plug the hole, plug the hole, plug the hole, without actually having this dynamic vision for how your relationship should really be. It's more just fixing problems, which was actually our issue as well. We were constantly just fixing what was broken. Well, this doesn't work. Well, let's fix that. And then we're just back to like ho-hum, you know, whatever. Mediocrity. And not actually projecting what we think how amazing this relationship could really be.
Which is why Gottman was so foundational for us, is that it brought as soon as we started to understand this, we knew that what we were doing previously wasn't working, and that there was a new option, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
And it took us in a completely different direction of 2 things. When you think of emotional intelligence, that means you have to address and clean up the past to be a whole, happy, healthy person in the relationship, and cast a vision together to move forward to the future.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So, and what he says with regard to practicing the 7 principles is that when people practice the 7 principles for making marriage work, they have a relapse rate that's about half that from standard marital therapy.
Which is huge.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is casting that vision and just working on, rather than just fixing the problem.
Right, instead of problem, fix problem, problem, fix problem, problem, fix problem.
Right. Do we want to talk about the single, the active listening?
I love that. Yeah.
So another thing that therapists often do, is give you a tool of active listening. And Gottman says that active listening in and of itself is not a bad tool.
Yeah.
It just can't be the only tool, which often happens. And active listening are the I statements, where somebody comes to you with a feeling or a thought, and you validate their feelings and say, I hear that you are saying that I don't empty out the dishwasher enough. And what he claims is that a lot of this system was created back in the 60s, where a therapist was sitting with a patient and hearing about a third party. Oh, what I'm hearing is that you don't like that your husband doesn't take out the dishes. Well, why this doesn't work by itself in couples, with couples, is that when they're using those I statements, they're literally, what he says, trashing the person that they're talking to.
In front of them.
In front of them,
Yeah.
rather than a third party. Like the I statement was designed for a therapist and a patient, not for a patient and a patient.
Well,
right?
yeah,
Right.
and I do see a benefit to the active listening, and we teach that
Sure.
to the kids, and we do use it where it's like, I feel this. But if that's all you're doing, and that's the only method in your plan,
You're not going to get very
you're not
far
gonna
in,
get very
in
far.
reconnecting your relationship.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, common myths.
Okay.
Which I like this one because the first one's a big deal to me.
This is a section, yes, where
Yeah.
he debunks a few myths, and he has like 6 of them in there, but we chose 3 that we
'cause
like
we
the
could be here
most.
for all day.
So one of the myths being that neuroses or personality problems ruin marriages. He says that is a total myth. And he has, go ahead. Yeah, he says that it's false, because that if a partner in the relationship can accommodate the crazy side with affection and care and respect, then marriages can thrive. And he uses a couple of examples that I like, where he says, a person in the relationship could have a controlling boss at work. And a lot of this stuff comes from old programming and family of origin, that you're not just going to fix them or change their belief on that controlling boss. So that person can't come home and then have this dominating spouse that's riding them constantly.
Shuts them down.
Or that it just shuts them down.
Yeah.
The other example he talks about is somebody might have abandonment issues that they need to work on, that spouse is just not going to change in them. And so if that person with an abandonment issue has a spouse that goes around flirting when they're at parties together,
yeah.
they're going to trigger, old emotions and really create conflict and maybe contempt in that relationship.
I have a couple of examples too that I know a lot of women can relate to, is like having a neat and tidy or clean house. And what I think this is saying is that it's okay to want a clean house, and your partner can find that endearing and appreciate the qualities of it. But let's insert emotional intelligence again, where I have a tendency, when it gets a little too out of sorts, that it throws me through the roof, and I can tend to get a little bit or a lot bit irritable.
Right.
Right, and frustrated. But, you gave me a good example when we were talking about this. I really like to change our environment regularly. Interior design is something that I just constantly do. And
Plus you like to just move a lot.
I do, yes. I like new, and there's probably an old programming issue with that. But you have found, you now find it endearing, and
Right.
you go with it.
And I'm a stability junkie,
You
I
are.
mean, I like things to be kind of normal and stable and steady. And so we've both made changes in
our
ourselves,
perception
of
I want to
that.
say it's in
Right.
perception.
All right, so the video cut off, and we were talking about common myths, the neuroses or personality problems, do they ruin marriages? And we were talking about your desire to move all the time and your environmental changes, and we were talking about perspective changes on how we deal with that. And although I'm a stable person and I like that stability, that my shift in perspective and care and admiration for your desires allows me to make that perspective shift, as well as changes in my thought patterns and how we deal with that.
I think the interesting piece to think about here is the true definition of friendship. And when I think about some of my dearest girlfriends, when they do certain things, I encourage them. It's endearing. Like I've always had a different energy about it. But somehow with you, when you would do certain things, the same thing really, it would irritate me. And so I don't know exactly what that correlation is when it's the person you're married to versus a dear friend of yours. But I think that that's the piece in our relationship that really changed, right?
Right.
Is that I find these things about you that are your neuroses endearing now, and I definitely didn't before.
Well, and the cool thing too is that when I think about it, it's like it takes me personally
Yeah.
on a different adventure I might not otherwise take if I was just living in my own programming, right?
Yeah.
So the next common myth that we chose to highlight is the you scratch my back, I scratch yours. The idea, of 50-50, that Gottman says that there are marriage experts out there that believe that couples that do the tit for tat actually have better marriages. That actually surprised me to hear that there are experts out there that believe this, because you and I know completely that when you are keeping score in a
Right.
relationship,
Attached to an outcome.
right? Yeah, when you have that attachment, when those expectations aren't met, it leads to frustration,
Suffering.
to suffering, to contempt,
Yep.
and most of the time, these 50-50 things are not even discussed. Like we talk about, like if I am supposed to take out the trash, we agree to that. If you're supposed to do some sort of chore, we agree to that. But what Gottman is talking about here is when people exercise covert contracts, meaning that there's this unspoken expectation of that other person to do those things for you when you've done something for them. And what happens additionally in that contempt space is the idea of a punishment cycle, whereas if you don't do what you're supposed to do, then I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to do.
And then the things just don't get done, and you're living in resentment. And I think that this also, a tip, from what we went through, is that we got really clear on our partnership contract, and we took all the things that needed to be done, and we said, okay, I don't mind doing that, I don't mind doing that, I'm good at that, I'm good at that, here's what's left over. Can we compromise? You take some of the crap stuff, I'll take some of the crap stuff, you delegate to that person, I delegate to that person, we bring someone in to help with that.
There's a system.
There's a system to it. There's, just like any business, your partnership piece needs to be treated as such.
Right.
And when you do that and then someone doesn't do their part, that's very different than I'm going to go ahead and do this in hopes that they then do this. Very
Right.
different.
Totally different.
Yeah.
So cool. The last myth we wanted to explore was that there are, again, Gottman says, marriage experts that believe that couples that avoid conflict have happier marriages, and that's just not true.
I lived in that marriage. I have a conflict avoider.
Yeah, I did. I just, and that's actually a big male thing. Men are typically don't like to rock the boat. They are more for the status quo, whatever isn't talked about or avoided, then everything's okay and happy. So, but we've since learned that, and we talked about the Lasada principle already of the,
Right.
more positive interactions to negative interactions. But what is understood about thriving and flourishing marriage is that actual conflict creates an opportunity for growth. When those situations are handled with loving kindness and the compassion, understanding, and the friendship that Gottman describes, that we grow together, we solve a problem together, we're victorious together,
Right.
and from the conflict comes growth.
And that doesn't mean that conflict feels good.
No.
It doesn't mean that I'm going to tiptoe around the issue and not directly deal with it and be honest.
Right.
I think that's another thing, that avoiding conflict creates a dishonest relationship, right? Because I'm feeling this, you did something to frustrate me, or there's something going on in our relationship that doesn't work for me. Avoiding it creates a pressure cooker, and what happens is that person, I'll tell a quick story, where Lance blew up one night about me not putting the paper towel roll back on, right? This was years ago. Yeah, and I didn't put the paper towel
We
roll.
can't ever forget the paper towel story, no. Okay.
No, right? But it's true. It was
is.
like, the issue was not the paper towels. The issue
No.
was the fact that I wasn't holding up my end of the bargain with all of the other things, and he had gone so long without saying something like, hey, do you think you can, help with this, or whatever it may be. But
Right, and so
yeah, so it creates a pressure cooker, and if you allow conflict to be navigated through emotional intelligence and genuine friendship, it's a growth tool.
it's a total growth tool.
Yeah.
Cool. The next section that we're going to go into is what does make marriage work. And Gottman does a lot of good summarizing of what he says, that couples that have great relationships have some of these traits. This is before the principles, but just some of the things he observed that highly connected couples do that helps their marriage work. And one of the big things he talks about is friendship versus fighting. And I just want to read a quote because it's kind of a drop the mic quote that he puts in this section. He says, "At the heart of the 7 principles approach is the simple truth that happy marriages are based on a deep friendship. By this, I mean a mutual respect for and enjoyment of each other's company. These couples tend to know each other intimately. They are well versed in each other's likes, dislikes, personality quirks, hopes, and dreams. They have an abiding regard for each other and express this fondness not just in big ways, but through small gestures day in and day out."
You talk so much and so well about our many habits throughout the day. And as much as we've done some really big things for our marriage, it's the little things.
Yeah, the daily little things that create that ripple effect, and they all just add up after a while, to creating this deep connectedness and friendship that he talks about here,
Right.
and the way we handle each other and throw little things out at each other, little loving gestures,
Right, not only little loving gestures, but like it's kind of like the whole thing where people say, oh, if it's not planned, it's not romantic, or that takes the, passion out of things. But our morning routine with each other is something that keeps us fueled through the day, having a check-in at night, having intimacy scheduled, like all of those things just...
Right, and even Gottman says it may seem a little humdrum and unromantic, these tiny things, but they're the things that stoke the fire for romance.
Right.
It's not this Hollywood thing. I think of that movie Say Anything, if you guys have seen that, where he holds the big boom box up, to this grand gesture of love, like Hollywood would like you to believe,
Right.
is what creates these wonderful marriages or relationships. It's not. It's the small little habits every single day.
Mm-hmm.
So the other piece of friendship versus fighting that I love is
the PSO.
PSO. He lends credit to an Oregon psychologist by the name of Robert Weiss, who talks about positive sentiment override. And what positive sentiment override is that it means that a couple's positive thoughts about each other and their marriage are so pervasive that they tend to supersede their negative feelings. And he goes on to say that even when strongly disagreeing, they assume the best about each other and the relationship and acknowledge each other's perspective.
Right, and I think that this is a big piece where you're on the same team. That's what resonates with me here, is that when you choose to marry someone and you're going to have kids together, share finances together, and live this life of intimacy and connection together, you're on the same team. So the person that you're having a conversation with, a disagreement with, a vision meeting, a planning meeting, you guys are on the same team. And I think so often, and we were so in this, we were at war with each other.
Right.
It was like we were in battle, and so we would go into these things as battle members instead of adversaries,
Mm-hmm.
instead of PhD adversaries. Instead of team members, we're on the same team. We're playing football together. You're the quarterback. I'm the guy that runs and catches it.
Totally. So,
Yeah.
And then the last thing we want to touch on in what does make marriage work in the friendship versus fighting, as well as even when couples fight, Gottman talks about repair attempts. He says repair attempts are the secret weapon in truly connected relationships. He says that true friendship has a secret weapon called the repair attempt. And what that really means is that even in those conflicts and those challenging and tough moments, that couples who have that really great friendship are able to throw humor in at it, or even apologize, like, we've done for each other before when we fought. We had, a nasty battle 2 days ago, and
Right, and it was me. I started it. And this is, I think this is a point to touch on, is that we had a bit of a perfect storm that went on. We were gone for 4 days camping, and when you come home from camping, your whole house gets piled with blankets and clothes, and everything's dirty and everything smells, and there's a lot to do, but you still have work to do, and you homeschool your kids, and then you're completely overwhelmed. So in a planning, trying to figure out how to move forward, I got really heated, and you got heated back, and we had a conflict moment. And two things. One, I'm proud that we're at a place where we didn't carry it through. That when it ended in that moment, it ended. But number two, I had to apologize.
Yeah, you
because
apologized.
I was more in the wrong than you were.
Right.
You reacted to me.
And what it was, I felt loved, and I loved the apology you sent to me later. But what was beautiful about how far we've come was that it wasn't even necessary.
Yeah.
Because
You knew
that
it wasn't
emotional
about you.
intelligence, I knew that old
Yeah.
Lance would have gotten defensive and thought you were attacking me. But I just realized you needed that moment to vent. You needed,
I
like,
just had
I'm
to
so
blow.
overwhelmed. I had to,
I had to blow.
And
Yeah.
I may have blown back, but I mean, we were kind of done with it, and it was just over. And you apologized later, but again, because of that friendship that we have with each other, it was over when it was over.
Right, and before, just for perspective, that would have lasted 4 days for us.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Right. So Gottman goes on to saying, that couples that are great at these repair attempts, the success of the attempts is dependent on the strength of their friendship.
I'll say one more thing to this before we move on to the next. The other thing that I know that I have to give myself credit for, because I'm the bigger hothead in our relationship, is there's times I'll just stop myself and be like, oh, I shouldn't have said it like that. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and,
Totally.
and so,
Very quick
or with you, he had a tendency to be defensive.
Right.
I will say, you're being defensive.
I'm like,
Right?
You're right.
Right, exactly. So, we're not perfect.
We're not.
Yeah,
No.
we're not perfect at all, but there's a quicker stop sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the last section we want to talk about in this video
Oh,
is
no,
right
you're
here.
Sorry.
Is that Gottman lays down this sort of truth bomb that I'll call it, and he says most marital arguments cannot be resolved. And I had to step back and kind of think of that for a second, because we always talk about
Which for me-
conflict resolution,
Right.
but he means it in a deeper
does.
way. He's talking about the sort of deep-seated, programming and things from your past. I'll let you
Yeah.
talk. I know you do a great job of talking about
Well,
this.
clearly I'm like crawling out of my skin to talk about this.
Yep.
So this is the work that I do one-on-one with women, because it is so important. I had a rough upbringing, and I carried those rocks and that baggage into our relationship in a way that it didn't matter if you left the toilet seat open or whatever else. It was someone's issue from my childhood.
Right.
Right? It was never that actual issue that I was struggling with. It was all the other issues of abandonment, my needing to control something, or, we could go on with the list of things that it penetrated into our current life. And it wasn't until I went and did that hard work of cleaning it up, and vice versa, that we stopped putting energy into the problems that weren't really problems, right?
Right. In fact, you're just saying exactly what Gottman says right here. He says, I can guarantee you that most quarrels are really not about whether the toilet lid was up or down or whose turn it is to
No.
take out the trash. There are
It's not.
deeper hidden issues that fuel these superficial conflicts and make them far more intense and hurtful than they would otherwise be. And he says that disconnected couples, because of this, and when they try to resolve these issues, these disconnected couples spend year after year trying to change each other's mind, but
So
it
here's the
can't be
deal.
done.
And, I may be talking to the women, I may be talking to anyone, but the issue is not the leaving the toilet seat up, not taking the garbage out, not cooking the meat properly. That's not the issue. The issue is somebody letting you down a long, long time ago, where that moment's a letdown. That's what it is. It's just a letdown. But the trigger is so intense, and it becomes a fight or a problem, because if the toilet seat gets left up, let's just put it down. The reason that it becomes a fight or a problem is because somebody let you down before, and you're perceiving that as a letdown. That's it.
So this is great. So what we've realized is that this video has gone on pretty darn long.
Yeah, too long.
So what we're going to do is we'll make another video for the what we call the divorce predictors, or
Yeah.
the 6 signs that Gottman has observed in the couples that he's watched in his love lab
Right.
and otherwise and in his practice. The 6 signs that he says these are the things that lead to divorce, and if they don't get corrected, then you're on a path here of not being together.
And we'll do that next. And I think we mentioned this in the beginning. The other videos are shorter and the topics are shorter because it's just one chapter. This was 3 and they were heady, right? This was the science.
So this will be our longest video. The rest will be much shorter. And
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
Until next time.